Welcome, and allow yourself to settle in for a journey through the shadows of medieval history. Tonight, we explore the hidden networks of surveillance and control that shaped medieval Europe, from the desperate struggles of common watchmen to the sophisticated intelligence operations of emperors, from the secret languages of executioners to the opulent rituals of cardinals. These are stories of power and powerlessness, of silence and secrets, of lives lived on the edge between order and chaos. Imagine yourself stepping back through centuries, leaving behind the comfort and safety of the modern world. The medieval period was a time when survival required constant vigilance, when knowledge was power, and when the difference between life and death often hung on information whispered in dark corners or observed by those society forgot existed. Tonight, we'll discover how medieval rulers created networks of surveillance that would seem familiar to any modern intelligence agency, yet operated in a world where disability could become an unexpected advantage and where even the most reviled professions developed their own sophisticated cultures. Let yourself relax as we begin this exploration of medieval Europe's hidden world, a world where silence could be more powerful than speech, where the powerless sometimes held the greatest secrets, and where even in the darkest corners of society, human ingenuity found ways to create order from chaos. Close your eyes if you wish, and let these stories of the past carry you gently into the night. You wake before dawn to the sound of church bells, your straw mattress damp with condensation from the poorly chinked walls of your one-room hovel. The air is thick with the musty scent of old thatch and human habitation, a smell that has seeped into every fiber of your clothing and every corner of your meager home. As the village watchman, your day begins in darkness and often ends in violence, though the violence is rarely the dramatic clash of swords that storytellers favor. Instead, it's the slow, grinding violence of poverty, suspicion, and the constant threat of chaos that hovers just beyond the edge of civilized life. The weight of your iron-tipped staff feels heavier each morning as you drag yourself from your bed of rags. The staff itself tells the story of your position. Neither quite a weapon nor quite a tool, it represents the ambiguous authority you hold in this small community. You're expected to maintain order, yet you have no legal training, no backing from distant lords beyond their occasional threats, and no resources save what the villagers grudgingly provide. The staff's iron tip is already showing signs of rust, and you know that when it finally breaks or wears away completely, there will be no money to replace it. Your first duty is to check the village gates, though calling them gates might be generous. These crude wooden barriers separate civilization from the wilderness beyond, but the distinction often feels arbitrary. The hinges creak ominously as you test each panel, and you note with growing dread that the left gate sags more than it did yesterday. The wood is rotting from the bottom up, victim of the endless cycle of rain and mud that defines much of the year. Repairing it properly would require new timber, metal fittings, and skilled carpentry, resources the village simply doesn't possess. You make your marks on the tally stick, scratching symbols that record the gate's condition for the village elder to review. This tally stick, carved with notches and scored with crude symbols, represents one of the few written records your community maintains. Most villagers cannot read or write, and even you possess only the most basic literacy, enough to record simple observations, but not enough to compose complex reports or understand legal documents. You know the village elder will likely ignore your report until disaster forces action, by which time the gate will have failed completely, leaving the village defensible only by the prayers of its inhabitants. The morning mist clings to the thatched roofs as you begin your rounds through streets that generously might be called pathways. These narrow channels between hovels collect water when it rains and dust when it doesn't, but most often they're filled with a mixture that defies easy description. You wade through human waste, animal droppings, and kitchen scraps that residents dump directly outside their doors, following a logic that sees the street as the appropriate place for anything unwanted inside their homes. The stench is overwhelming, a complex cocktail of rotting vegetables, excrement, and the sickly sweet smell of infection that seems to follow the poorest villagers like an invisible companion. This smell never quite leaves your nostrils. It clings to your clothes and skin, marking you as surely as any badge of office. Your leather boots, already cracked and letting in moisture, squelch with each step through the organic sludge that never quite dries, even in summer. The constant dampness creates a breeding ground for diseases you can't name but recognize by their effects. The pale faces, the persistent coughs, the children who grow thin despite eating. As you patrol these familiar yet constantly changing streets, you encounter Godwin the baker emerging from his shop. He greets you not with warmth, but with the careful suspicion that characterizes most of your interactions with the villagers. Godwin is convinced that someone has been stealing flour from his stores, and his eyes narrow as he studies your face for signs of guilt or knowledge. In a village of perhaps 60 souls, everyone is simultaneously neighbor and potential enemy, friend and suspect. You know secrets about Godwin that he believes are hidden, how he waters down his bread with sawdust when grain is scarce, stretching meager supplies to last through the hungry months. You also know that he's aware of your own small compromises, like the times you look the other way when young mothers slip extra loaves into their baskets, their children's hollow eyes making legal niceties seem less important than immediate need. This web of small corruptions and necessary blindness defines much of your existence as watchmen. You see everything, know everything, yet must pretend ignorance to maintain the delicate balance that keeps the community functioning. The sound of approaching hoofbeats makes your stomach clench with familiar dread. Sound travels far in the morning air, and the rhythm of multiple horses suggests either very good news or very bad news, and good news rarely arrives unannounced. A group of armed riders approaches the village gates, their horses' hooves drumming against the packed earth of the road. These aren't the Lord's men, whose colors and approach you would recognize immediately. Instead, these strangers were the faded colors of a distant manor, their equipment showing the hard use that suggests soldiers between masters. Their leader, a scarred man with cold eyes that have seen too much violence, dismounts and approaches you with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to having his questions answered. He demands to know if any of Lord Aldrich's tax collectors have passed through recently, and the way he asks, not quite a question, not quite a threat, tells you immediately what you're dealing with. These are brigands, possibly deserters from some forgotten conflict. Men who have discovered that the line between soldier and bandit becomes very thin when pay stops coming and authorities grow distant. They're hunting tax collectors, those unpopular but necessary officials who represent what little order exists in your world. The irony isn't lost on you. Brigands seeking to rob the very system that, however imperfectly, maintains the fragile peace that allows villages like yours to exist. Your hand trembles slightly on your staff as you consider your options, each one carrying its own risks and moral compromises. You could tell the truth, that a tax collector stayed in the village in just 2 nights ago, a tired man with soft hands and nervous eyes who spoke fondly of his wife and children waiting in the next county. Honesty might satisfy the brigand's immediate questions, but it would almost certainly doom an innocent man whose only crime was serving a system that, for all its flaws, represents the alternative to chaos. The brigands watch your face with the patience of predators, reading your fear and uncertainty like a familiar text. You could lie, but lies carry their own dangers. If they discover your deception, their response would likely be swift and brutal. Village watchmen who impede brigands don't usually live to make the same mistake twice. Moreover, if you direct them toward a false trail, you might simply be condemning other innocent travelers they encounter along the way. Every choice seems to require trading one life for another, one moral compromise for another. The brigands' hands rest casually on their sword hilts, a reminder that your death would mean nothing to them beyond a minor inconvenience. You realize that your authority here is entirely illusory. These men recognize no lord's justice, follow no code beyond immediate profit, and see your staff as no more threatening than a farmer's hoe. In this moment, the careful balance of power that defines village life reveals itself as the fragile fiction it has always been. You choose to lie, directing them toward the eastern road where you know no tax collector has traveled in recent months. The words feel heavy in your mouth, weighted with potential consequences you can't foresee. The brigands accept your information without thanks, mounting their horses and riding away with the casual indifference of men who take what they need and move on. You're left standing in the morning mist, wondering if you've just signed the death warrant of some innocent traveler they'll encounter instead, or if your deception will eventually circle back to destroy your own community when they discover they've been misled. The weight of this decision follows you through the rest of your morning rounds, adding to the growing collection of moral compromises that define your role as guardian of a community that exists perpetually on the edge of catastrophe. Every choice you make carries consequences beyond immediate sight, rippling outward in ways you can't predict or control. This is the burden of authority without power. You're responsible for outcomes you can't determine, blamed for failures you can't prevent. The afternoon brings its own familiar horrors. A dispute erupts between two families over property boundaries, specifically, a strip of land perhaps 10 feet wide that could mean the difference between survival and starvation when winter arrives. The argument begins as a heated discussion but escalates quickly through the predictable stages of rural conflict. Raised voices, accusations about past grievances, invocations of long-dead relatives who supposedly settled the matter years ago, and finally the ominous sound of farm tools being picked up and brandished as weapons. As the watchman, you're expected to resolve this conflict. Despite having no legal training beyond the practical experience of previous disputes, no authority beyond what the villagers grudgingly grant you, and no resources to enforce any decision you might make. The law, such as it exists at this level of medieval society, is largely a matter of precedent, memory, and the ability to maintain peace through exhaustion rather than justice. You attempt to mediate between families whose grievances stretch back generations. Both have legitimate claims to the disputed land, supported by the contradictory memories of old men who swear by different versions of ancient agreements. The boundaries were never formally surveyed. Such luxuries are available only to the wealthy, existing instead in the collective memory of villagers who now find their recollections influenced by current need rather than historical accuracy. The tension escalates until Henrik the Younger, frustrated by the circular nature of the discussion and emboldened by the presence of his adult sons, draws a rusty blade and threatens to settle the matter with blood. The weapon trembles in his hand, revealing his fear despite his aggressive words. But fear can make violence more likely rather than less. Your intervention nearly results in the knife being turned on you, as both families suddenly unite in their resentment of outside interference, even interference they had specifically requested. The resolution, when it finally comes, arrives not through justice but through exhaustion and the approaching threat of evening. Both families, worn down by hours of argument and increasingly aware that darkness will bring its own dangers, agree to postpone their dispute until after harvest. This compromise satisfies no one and guarantees that the conflict will resume with greater intensity later, when winter's approach makes the disputed land's value even more crucial. You've prevented immediate bloodshed, but at the cost of storing up greater violence for the future. This is the nature of much of your work, not solving problems, but merely delaying them while they grow more dangerous in the shadows. The families part with muttered threats and dark looks, their children watching and learning that disputes are settled not through law but through temporary exhaustion of the will to fight. As darkness approaches, your true ordeal begins. The village settles into an uneasy quiet that feels more ominous than peaceful. During daylight hours, the community maintains a semblance of normal life. People work, children play, neighbors interact with the careful politeness that maintains social bonds. But night transforms everything, revealing the fragility of the order you're supposed to maintain. Night brings predators, both human and otherwise. Wolves occasionally venture close enough to the village to snatch children who wander too far from their homes, drawn by the scent of human habitation and the easy prey represented by domestic animals. But more dangerous are the human wolves, bandits, deserters, escaped serfs, and religious fanatics who see isolated villages as easy prey, communities too small to defend themselves effectively, but large enough to contain valuable resources. Your night patrol takes you along paths lit only by occasional torches that sputter and die in the damp air, creating pools of uncertain light that somehow make the darkness beyond seem even more threatening. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Every sound might signal approaching danger. You carry no lantern yourself, understanding that light would make you a target while destroying your night vision. Instead, you move through familiar darkness, guided by memory and instinct, listening for sounds that don't belong to the normal rhythm of village life. The village dogs serve as your early warning system, but their alerts are often false and their timing unreliable. Tonight, they bark frantically at what turns out to be nothing more threatening than a merchant's cart returning late from market, the driver exhausted and his horse stumbling with fatigue. But their false alarm masks the approach of something far more sinister. By the time you realize that the figure slipping between houses isn't a villager making a late-night trip to the communal privy, the intruder has already reached the church. The church represents one of the village's few sources of valuable portable wealth. Communion silver that, while modest by the standards of great cathedrals, represents a tempting target for desperate men. This silver isn't just monetary value but the spiritual heart of the community, blessed objects that connect the villagers to the wider world of Christendom and provide comfort in their harsh lives. You confront the thief in the church doorway, your staff raised but your heart hammering with terror that makes your hands shake and your vision blur. The man is gaunt with hunger, desperate with the knowledge that capture means death, and armed with a long knife that gleams dully in the moonlight filtering through the church's single window. His clothes mark him as a runaway serf, probably fleeing some lord's justice for an earlier crime, a man who has reached the point where survival requires increasingly desperate measures. The fight that follows is brief, brutal, and clumsy, a far cry from the skilled combat of heroic tales. Neither of you is a trained warrior. You swing your staff wildly, hoping to disable him before he can close distance, connecting with his shoulder but failing to prevent him from slashing at you with his knife. The blade catches you across the ribs, a burning line of pain that immediately soaks your tunic with blood, hot and sticky against your skin. You manage to knock him down with a lucky blow to the head, the impact reverberating up your arms and leaving your hands numb. But he scrambles away into the darkness before you can capture him, disappearing between houses with the desperate agility of a cornered animal. You're left bleeding, alone, and facing the terrible knowledge that you've failed in your primary duty, protecting the community's spiritual and material welfare. The silver is gone, representing not just monetary loss, but a blow to the community's spiritual life that will resonate for months or years to come. Worse, the thief has escaped to potentially strike again, either here or in some other defenseless village. Your wound throbs with each heartbeat, and you know that infection could easily claim your life in the coming days. The village has no trained physician, only a wise woman whose remedies are as likely to kill as cure. The remaining hours of darkness pass in a haze of pain and paranoia. Every shadow seems to hide another threat. Every sound suggests returning danger. You know that word of your failure will spread quickly through the village, undermining what little authority you possessed. Some will blame you for the theft, others will question whether you fought the intruder at all or simply allowed him to escape after taking a share of the silver for yourself. Dawn brings no relief, only the prospect of another day exactly like this one. Your wound needs tending, but medical care in the village consists of folk remedies passed down through generations, treatments that might help or might introduce new infections. The missing silver must be reported to Lord Aldrich's steward, a man who shows no patience for failure and less mercy for excuses. He will want to know why you failed to prevent the theft, why you couldn't capture the thief, and what you plan to do to prevent future incidents. The thief remains free to strike again, and your failure to capture him marks you as incompetent in the eyes of both your neighbors and your distant lord. There will be no reward for the risks you took, no recognition of your courage in confronting an armed, desperate man, no acknowledgement of the impossible position you occupy between a community's needs and your own limitations. You realize, with growing despair, that this is your life until death claims you. There is no retirement from being a village watchman, no pension for years of faithful service, no escape from the grinding cycle of danger and responsibility. You are trapped by birth, by circumstance, and by the simple fact that someone must stand between the village and the chaos that constantly threatens to overwhelm it. As you contemplate another day of navigating between suspicious neighbors, violent disputes, and nocturnal predators, you understand why most men in your position die young, not from dramatic battles or heroic sacrifices, but from the slow accumulation of small wounds, constant stress, and the gradual erosion of hope that defines life at the bottom of medieval society's rigid hierarchy. The village depends on you to maintain an order that is always fragile, always temporary, always one crisis away from complete collapse. Your staff feels heavier than ever as you prepare for another day of impossible choices and inevitable compromises. The weight isn't just the iron and wood, but the accumulated burden of responsibility without authority, duty without reward, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring new challenges that you'll face alone. In the space between civilization and chaos, holding the line not because you're particularly brave or skilled, but simply because someone must. Yet in the grand palaces of medieval Europe, other watchers move through shadows with far greater purpose and sophistication. Where village watchmen struggled with crude staffs and local disputes, emperors commanded networks of surveillance that spanned continents. Let us now turn to one of the most remarkable intelligence operations in medieval history, a system so unusual that it challenges our assumptions about both medieval capabilities and the nature of disability itself. In the sweltering heat of a Sicilian summer in 1240, Emperor Frederick II sat in his palace at Palermo, surrounded by scrolls written in Arabic, Latin, and Greek, contemplating a problem that had plagued rulers since the dawn of civilization. The afternoon light filtered through intricate stone latte work, casting geometric shadows across maps that showed his vast domain stretching from Germany to Jerusalem. How could he know what his subjects truly thought and planned when he wasn't watching? How could he penetrate the whispered conversations, the secret meetings, the coded correspondences that shaped the political landscape of his age? The solution he devised would create one of medieval Europe's most unusual and effective intelligence networks. A secret police force composed entirely of deaf men whose loyalty was guaranteed not just by oath or payment, but by their profound isolation from the hearing world that both employed and dismissed them. Frederick Hohenstaufen was no ordinary medieval monarch, and Sicily was no ordinary medieval kingdom. Born in 1194 in this cosmopolitan realm where the Mediterranean's great cultures converged, Frederick had inherited a land where Norman efficiency merged with Arab scholarship, where Byzantine traditions blended with Italian innovation. His court was a living babel of languages and traditions, his kingdom a crossroads where Christian knights served alongside Muslim administrators and Jewish scholars debated theology, with Catholic bishops in halls decorated with mosaics that told stories in 3 different artistic traditions. This unique environment shaped Frederick into a ruler who thought in ways that scandalized his contemporaries and earned him epithets that ranged from admiring to horrified. Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world, proclaimed his supporters. The beast of the apocalypse, whispered his enemies. Both sides agreed that he represented something unprecedented in medieval kingship, a ruler who combined the learning of a scholar with the pragmatism of a merchant and the ruthlessness of a conqueror. The idea for his deaf intelligence network emerged gradually from Frederick's observation of court life during his youth, when he was still learning the complex art of medieval rulership under the guidance of regents who saw him as a useful figurehead for their own ambitions. He had noticed, with the acute awareness that often develops in those who must navigate dangerous political waters from an early age, that conversations would halt abruptly when certain servants entered rooms. Nobles would switch to coded language around stablemen and kitchen workers. Diplomats would fall silent when pages approached with wine or food. Yet there was one group around whom even the most sensitive discussions continued without pause: the deaf servants who had been employed throughout the palace out of what appeared to be Christian charity. These men, dismissed by the hearing world as simple-minded or blessed innocents, moved through the court like living furniture, present but not truly seen, capable of observing but supposedly incapable of understanding or reporting what they witnessed. Frederick's genius lay in recognizing that society's assumptions about deaf individuals created an unprecedented opportunity for surveillance. These men were often highly intelligent, having developed sophisticated systems of visual communication among themselves that allowed for complex discussions and detailed planning. Yet they were consistently underestimated by the hearing world, which assumed that their inability to hear meant an inability to think, to plan, or to participate meaningfully in the intricate games of power that defined court life. They could observe with perfect clarity, remember with remarkable precision, and report with absolute accuracy. Yet they remained invisible to those they watched because their watchers had convinced themselves that deaf men were incapable of meaningful observation. It was a blindness born of prejudice, and Frederick intended to exploit it completely. The emperor began recruiting deaf men from across his territories, seeking individuals who demonstrated not just intelligence and loyalty, but specific skills that would make them valuable intelligence assets. He looked for men who could read lips in multiple languages, a crucial requirement in his multilingual court where conversations might switch from Latin to Arabic to Italian within a single sentence. He sought those who showed aptitude for memory work, who could observe complex interactions and retain every detail for later reporting. Most importantly, he needed men whose deafness was genuine and complete, for any pretense would eventually be discovered, and the entire network would be compromised. The recruitment process was delicate and necessarily slow, as Frederick's agents sought deaf men who possessed both the intellectual capabilities and the psychological resilience necessary for intelligence work. Frederick established a training facility in a remote monastery in the hills above Palermo, where these recruits learned skills that would have seemed like magic to most of their contemporaries. They studied the arts of observation and memory using techniques borrowed from classical rhetoric, methods for organizing and retaining vast amounts of information that had been developed by ancient orators and adapted for this new purpose. They learned to read facial expressions and body language for signs of deception, to recognize the subtle tells that revealed when someone was lying, frightened, or concealing important information. They studied the positioning of furniture and the arrangement of rooms, understanding how to place themselves where they could observe maximum information while appearing to perform menial tasks that justified their presence. But perhaps most remarkably, they developed a sophisticated sign language system that allowed for detailed, silent communication among themselves and with their handlers. This visual vocabulary went far beyond the simple gestures that deaf communities had always used for basic communication. Drawing on Arabic mathematical symbols, monastic scriptural abbreviations, and Byzantine court ceremonial gestures, they created a language that could convey abstract concepts, emotional nuances, and detailed tactical information with precision that rivaled spoken communication. The sign language Frederick's agents used was taught only to the agents themselves and to Frederick's most trusted scribes, creating a communication network that was virtually impossible for outsiders to penetrate. Even if someone observed the agents communicating, the significance of their gestures would remain hidden, appearing to be nothing more than the random movements of men who had developed their own crude system for basic interaction. Training these silent agents required years of preparation that went far beyond the development of observation and communication skills. They needed to understand the political landscape they would be monitoring, studying the genealogies of noble families to recognize important relationships and potential conflicts of interest. They learned about the economic interests of merchant guilds, the theological disputes that divided church factions, and the military concerns that shaped diplomatic negotiations. This background knowledge was crucial for understanding the significance of overheard conversations. A casual mention of troop movements meant nothing without understanding the political context that made such movements threatening or reassuring. A reference to marriage negotiations required knowledge of family alliances to reveal whether such unions would strengthen or threaten Frederick's position. The agents operated under carefully constructed cover identities that took advantage of medieval society's assumptions about appropriate roles for deaf men. Some became valued court entertainers, using their perceived disability to create comic performances that masked their real purpose while providing perfect justification for their presence during important gatherings. Their supposed simplicity made their entertainment seem harmless, even endearing, while their actual intelligence allowed them to understand and remember every significant detail of the events they appeared to merely witness. Others worked as scribes and copyists, their supposed inability to hear making them seem ideal for handling sensitive documents since they theoretically couldn't gossip about their contents. In reality, these agents could read every document they copied, understanding its significance and reporting its contents through their silent communication network. Their deafness, rather than being a limitation, became their greatest asset in gaining access to confidential information. A few agents even served in monasteries and churches, where their apparent holy silence was interpreted as evidence of divine favor rather than natural disability. Medieval Christianity often viewed physical disabilities as signs of spiritual significance, and the agent's deafness could be presented as a form of blessed detachment from worldly concerns that actually enhanced their spiritual worthiness. Frederick's deaf network proved its worth during the complex negotiations surrounding his controversial crusade to Jerusalem in 1228. While other European rulers condemned his diplomatic approach to reclaiming Christian holy sites, preferring the traditional method of simply attacking Muslim forces, Frederick's agents provided detailed intelligence about the internal politics of both the Christian military orders and the Muslim court of Sultan al-Kamil. The agents discovered that several supposedly loyal Christian nobles were secretly negotiating with Muslim leaders, planning to sabotage Frederick's expedition for their own political gain. These nobles, who publicly supported the crusade while privately undermining it, believed their communications were secure because they conducted them in settings where only trusted servants were present, servants who included Frederick's deaf agents, invisible in their assumed incapacity. The intelligence gathered by these silent watchers allowed Frederick to outmaneuver his enemies with surgical precision. Rather than confronting the traitors directly, which would have revealed his intelligence capabilities and forced the conspiracy underground, he fed them false information about his military plans and troop movements. The conspirators dutifully passed these lies to Muslim commanders, who adjusted their defensive strategies accordingly. When the deception was revealed during crucial negotiations, it discredited the Christian conspirators while simultaneously demonstrating Frederick's superior intelligence capabilities to Sultan al-Kamil. The Muslim leader, impressed by Frederick's ability to manipulate his own nobles so effectively, became more willing to negotiate seriously with an opponent who clearly understood the game being played on multiple levels. This careful manipulation ultimately facilitated the peaceful negotiation that returned Jerusalem to Christian control without a single major battle, an outcome that seemed miraculous to contemporary observers but was actually the result of superior intelligence work conducted by men whose disability had been transformed into their greatest professional asset. The deaf agents also uncovered a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the church hierarchy, revealing how Frederick's intelligence network could penetrate even the most secure religious institutions. Several bishops, concerned about Frederick's tolerant policies toward Muslims and Jews in Sicily, had been secretly corresponding with Pope Gregory IX about possible grounds for excommunication and the theological justification for deposing an emperor who seemed insufficiently committed to Christian orthodoxy. The intercepted communications revealed not just the ecclesiastical plot against Frederick's authority, but also the financial incentives driving the conspiracy. The bishops had been promised lucrative benefices and territorial grants in exchange for supporting papal supremacy over imperial authority, transforming what appeared to be a theological dispute into a calculated political and economic maneuver. Armed with this detailed intelligence about clerical corruption, Frederick was able to neutralize the conspiracy through a sophisticated combination of diplomacy, strategic bribery, and carefully targeted appointments. He promoted bishops who had remained loyal to key positions within his territories, granted strategic concessions to moderate opponents who could be won over, and used his detailed knowledge of the plot to convince wavering church leaders that their communications were being monitored by mysterious means. The failure of the conspiracy enhanced Frederick's reputation as a ruler with almost supernatural awareness of his enemies' plans, when in reality his success came from very earthly intelligence work conducted by agents whose deafness allowed them to observe without being noticed, to be present without being seen as threats. The effectiveness of Frederick's silent network extended far beyond political intelligence to encompass economic and social surveillance that gave him unprecedented control over his territories. The deaf agents provided detailed reports on tax evasion schemes, identifying merchants who underreported their profits and nobles who concealed their true wealth to avoid their financial obligations to the crown. They tracked illegal trading practices, monitoring smuggling operations, and unauthorized commercial activities that deprived Frederick's government of customs revenues. They observed the movement of goods across the kingdom's borders, providing intelligence that allowed Frederick to adjust his economic policies to maximize revenue while minimizing the social disruption that could lead to rebellion. The agents identified corrupt officials at all levels of government, from minor clerks who demanded extra payments for routine services to high-ranking administrators who skimmed significant percentages from tax collections. This information allowed Frederick to maintain much tighter control over his bureaucracy than most medieval rulers achieved, replacing corrupt officials with loyal alternatives while using the threat of exposure to ensure continued honesty from those who remained in position. They also tracked the activities of bandit groups and criminal organizations, providing intelligence that allowed Frederick's military forces to intercept raids before they occurred and arrest criminal leaders before they could establish secure bases of operation. The agents monitored the spread of heretical religious movements that could threaten political stability, identifying the leaders and supporters of groups that challenged both church and state authority. One of the network's most sophisticated operations involved infiltrating the merchant communities of Sicily's major ports, where international trade provided both opportunities for wealth creation and vulnerabilities that foreign agents could exploit. Agents working as dock laborers and warehouse guards provided detailed intelligence about smuggling operations, foreign spies, and the financial dealings that funded various political factions. This economic intelligence allowed Frederick to manipulate trade policies, tax collection, and currency regulations with unprecedented precision, generating revenue that funded his military campaigns while weakening his enemies' financial resources. He could identify which merchants were funding his opponents, which trade routes were being used to supply hostile forces, and which economic pressure points could be exploited to achieve political objectives. The DEF agents developed increasingly sophisticated methods for recording and transmitting the intelligence they gathered, creating systems that would have impressed professional intelligence organizations centuries later. They developed visual codes using the arrangement of objects, clothing choices, and positioning within rooms to convey complex information to their handlers without any obvious communication taking place. Some agents learned to create detailed written reports using encoded scripts that appeared to be religious texts or commercial records, but actually contained political and military intelligence. These documents could be transported openly without arousing suspicion, as they seemed to contain only routine administrative information or spiritual reflections appropriate to their supposed authors. The agents also developed methods for coordinating their activities across Frederick's territories, using a network of safe houses and communication drops that allowed for intelligence sharing between widely separated regions. This coordination enabled them to track conspiracies that spanned multiple locations and to provide Frederick with comprehensive understanding of threats that might otherwise have remained hidden until they materialized as actual attacks. Frederick's network faced its greatest test during the rebellion of 1246, when a coalition of Sicilian nobles attempted to overthrow imperial authority with support from both the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire's German princes. This conspiracy represented the most serious challenge to Frederick's rule, combining domestic discontent with foreign intervention in a way that threatened to destroy everything he had built in Sicily. The DEF agents had been monitoring the conspiracy for months before it erupted into open rebellion, providing detailed intelligence about secret meetings, funding sources, and military preparations that allowed Frederick to understand the full scope of the threat he faced. They identified which nobles were actively supporting the rebellion, which were wavering in their loyalty, and which could potentially be won back through appropriate incentives. This advance warning allowed Frederick to prepare countermeasures while appearing to remain unaware of the threat developing around him. He quietly repositioned loyal military units, secured strategic fortifications, and prepared financial resources for an extended conflict, all while maintaining the public facade of a ruler confident in his subjects' loyalty. When the rebellion finally began, Frederick's forces were positioned exactly where they needed to be. His loyal supporters had been secretly reinforced with additional resources and troops, and the rebels found their communications compromised at every level. Their secret plans had been known to Frederick for months. Their military movements were anticipated and countered, and their attempts to coordinate with foreign supporters were intercepted and disrupted. The swift collapse of the uprising was attributed by chroniclers to Frederick's divine favor or diabolic powers, depending on their political sympathies, But the reality was more mundane and more impressive. Superior intelligence had enabled superior strategy, and the rebels never had a real chance of success because their every move was known to their target before they made it. The DEF network's success created new challenges for Frederick's administration, as the infrastructure required to support such sophisticated intelligence operations grew increasingly complex. Training and managing agents across his territories required specialized personnel who understood both intelligence work and the unique needs of DEF operatives. Secure facilities were needed for training, communication, and coordination, while complex logistics supported the movement of agents and the transmission of intelligence across vast distances. The emperor established what amounted to a shadow bureaucracy to handle intelligence operations, complete with safe houses, coded communication systems, and financial networks for paying agents and informants. This infrastructure became a model for later intelligence organizations throughout Europe, demonstrating techniques and organizational structures that would influence espionage work for centuries to come. However, the network's very success made it a target for Frederick's enemies, who gradually became aware that the emperor possessed intelligence capabilities that exceeded normal medieval standards. Pope Innocent IV, in particular, became convinced that Frederick's uncanny awareness of his enemies' plans had supernatural origins, declaring the use of DEF spies to be diabolic and claiming that their silence was evidence of demonic influence rather than natural disability. This religious condemnation created serious problems for the intelligence network, as it made recruitment more difficult and increased the personal danger faced by existing agents. Some agents were attacked by mobs convinced they were supernatural threats to Christian society, while others found themselves subjected to exorcism attempts by zealous clergy who believed they were possessed by demons rather than simply deaf. The techniques they pioneered, systematic surveillance, coded communication, and the exploitation of social assumptions about disability, influenced intelligence operations for centuries to come. Their methods were studied, adapted, and implemented by rulers throughout Europe who recognized the value of professional intelligence gathering. More importantly, their existence demonstrated that medieval rulers could create surprisingly modern administrative systems when circumstances demanded innovation and when conventional approaches proved inadequate to the challenges they faced. Frederick's DEF agents represented a remarkable fusion of medieval ingenuity and timeless intelligence principles, showing how disability could be transformed from social limitation into professional advantage through careful planning and systematic exploitation of societal prejudices. The story of these silent spies reminds us that medieval Europe was far more sophisticated and capable than popular stereotypes suggest, and that some of history's most remarkable achievements came from recognizing the hidden potential in those whom society had dismissed as incapable or irrelevant. In the shadowy world of medieval intelligence, silence truly was golden, and those who could not hear became the eyes and memory of one of Europe's most remarkable rulers. From the sophisticated surveillance networks of emperors, we turn now to another hidden aspect of medieval society: the secret languages and professional mysteries that developed among those whose work placed them at the very edges of acceptable society. In the margins of legal documents and the shadows of execution grounds, scholars have discovered traces of knowledge systems that reveal the unexpected sophistication of medieval Europe's most necessary yet despised professionals. In the basement archives of Prague Castle, where centuries of documents rest in climate-controlled silence, conservators working to restore medieval manuscripts made a discovery that would challenge our understanding of how medieval society organized its most difficult knowledge. The year was 2018, and the conservation team was carefully examining legal documents from the 14th century when they noticed something peculiar hidden within the margins of official court records. Scattered throughout these documents were words and phrases written in a script that seemed familiar, yet remained stubbornly incomprehensible. The characters were clearly Latin, formed by hands trained in the standard medieval scripts, yet the words followed no known pattern of medieval vernacular. They appeared to be neither classical Latin nor any recognized regional dialect, but something else entirely: a specialized vocabulary that had been important enough for medieval scribes to preserve alongside official legal proceedings. Initial attempts to translate these marginal notes using standard medieval dictionaries failed completely, leaving scholars with pages of what appeared to be sophisticated gibberish. The words were clearly intentional, written with care and precision, yet they resisted every conventional approach to medieval linguistics. Some terms appeared repeatedly across different documents, suggesting systematic usage rather than random scribbling, while others seemed to follow grammatical patterns that hinted at an underlying logical structure. The breakthrough came when linguistic anthropologist Dr. Helena Moravkova recognized patterns that suggested these weren't corrupted Latin words, but rather a professional jargon, specialized vocabulary developed and used by practitioners of a particular trade who needed to communicate about their work without being understood by outsiders. The context of the documents, all relating to criminal justice and punishment, led her team to propose an extraordinary hypothesis. They had discovered fragments of the lost professional language used by medieval executioners. This discovery opened a window into a hidden world that medieval society preferred to keep invisible. Executioners occupied a unique and deeply uncomfortable position in medieval European culture, performing functions that were absolutely essential for maintaining law and order, while simultaneously being considered spiritually polluted by their constant contact with death and violence. They were necessary yet reviled, indispensable yet untouchable, creating a social paradox that shaped every aspect of their professional and personal lives. Medieval European society's relationship with executioners was profoundly contradictory, reflecting deeper anxieties about violence, justice, and the moral cost of maintaining social order. These individuals carried out the state's ultimate punishment, serving as the visible instruments of royal and ecclesiastical justice, yet they were simultaneously excluded from the very society they served. They were legally required to live outside city walls, forbidden from entering churches during regular services, and prohibited from most social interactions with ordinary citizens. Their children faced similar restrictions, inheriting their parents' social pollution along with their professional knowledge, creating hereditary dynasties of executioners who passed their skills and their isolation from generation to generation. This extreme social segregation created conditions remarkably similar to those that foster the development of Creole languages or specialized argots among other marginalized professional groups throughout history. Just as thieves developed elaborate cant vocabularies to discuss criminal activities without detection, just as physicians created Latin-based terminologies to mystify their practices and exclude unauthorized practitioners, and just as merchants invented coded languages to protect valuable trade secrets, executioners appear to have developed their own sophisticated linguistic system. This secret vocabulary allowed them to communicate about techniques, equipment, and professional knowledge while maintaining the secrecy that their precarious social position demanded. The vocabulary fragments discovered in the Prague archives reveal the unexpected sophistication of medieval execution as a professional practice. Contrary to popular images of crude butchery carried out by brutish individuals, medieval executioners were skilled craftsmen who needed to understand human anatomy, metallurgy, pharmacology, and crowd psychology. Their work required precise technical knowledge, careful preparation, and the ability to manage complex social and psychological dynamics during public spectacles that served multiple functions beyond simple punishment. The secret language reflects this complexity, containing precise terms for different types of blades and their optimal uses, techniques for ensuring quick death while satisfying legal requirements for public suffering, methods for managing condemned prisoners' psychological state during their final hours, and strategies for maintaining public order during executions that could easily turn into riots if mishandled. One extensive category of terms relates to the psychological preparation of condemned prisoners, revealing that executioners understood their role to extend far beyond the moment of death itself. The secret vocabulary contains specific words for different types of pre-execution counseling, techniques for calming hysteria that could disrupt proceedings, and methods for ensuring that prisoners could walk to the scaffold without collapsing from terror. These weren't acts of cruelty disguised as mercy, but professional necessities born from practical experience. A prisoner who became completely incapacitated with fear could disrupt the entire execution process, potentially causing botched attempts that would traumatize spectators and undermine the legal system's authority. The executioner's job was to ensure that justice appeared both inevitable and properly administered, requiring careful management of everyone involved in the spectacle. The technical vocabulary for execution methods reveals the precision required for what appeared to outsiders as simple acts of violence. Different terms described various angles of axe blows optimized for different body types, the positioning of nooses to ensure proper strangulation while meeting legal requirements for visible suffering, and the precise timing required when multiple executioners work together during complex punishments like drawing and quartering. The secret language included extensive terminology for equipment maintenance, describing techniques for keeping blades properly sharpened, methods for conditioning ropes to ensure reliable performance, and procedures for constructing pyres that would burn at optimal temperatures for executions involving fire. These technical details reflected the executioner's understanding that his professional reputation depended on consistent, reliable performance during public events where failure would be witnessed by hundreds or thousands of observers. Perhaps most intriguingly, the executioner's cant contained extensive vocabulary related to reading condemned prisoners' physiological responses during torture and execution. Professional executioners needed to assess whether prisoners were genuinely unconscious or merely pretending, whether apparent death was real or temporary, and whether torture subjects were approaching their physical limits during interrogations designed to extract confessions. This knowledge was crucial for fulfilling complex legal requirements while avoiding complications that could create political or religious problems. Medieval law often specified particular types of suffering or specific durations of torture, and executioners needed to ensure compliance while preventing accidental deaths that could invalidate legal proceedings or create martyrs who might inspire further opposition to authority. The secret language also reveals the complex social dynamics within executioner families and professional guilds. Terms existed for different levels of training and expertise, from apprentices learning basic techniques under careful supervision to master executioners capable of handling the most complex legal punishments. The vocabulary distinguished between specialists who focused on different types of execution, hanging, beheading, burning, or the various forms of torture that medieval law prescribed for different categories of crime. Economic terminology within the cant illuminates the business aspects of professional execution that most historical sources ignore or downplay. Executioners typically charged fees for their services, with different rates for different types of death and additional charges for special requirements like preserving body parts for public display or ensuring particular types of suffering for especially heinous crimes. The secret language contained detailed vocabulary for negotiating these fees with local authorities, managing the complex relationships between executioners and the officials who employed them, and handling the logistics of public executions that might require transporting equipment, coordinating with guards and clergy, and managing crowds that could number in the thousands. The geographical distribution of this professional language reveals networks of communication among executioners across medieval Europe that transcended political boundaries. Similar terms appear in documents from Prague, Nuremberg, and Paris, suggesting that executioner families maintained contact across kingdoms and principalities, sharing techniques and professional knowledge despite their social isolation from mainstream society. These connections may have been maintained through marriages between executioner families, apprenticeship exchanges that allowed young executioners to learn techniques from masters in distant cities, or secret professional gatherings where practitioners could share innovations and discuss common challenges. Such networks would have been necessary for maintaining professional standards and ensuring that executioners could fulfill their responsibilities competently despite their exclusion from normal educational and social institutions. Religious terminology within the cant reflects the complex spiritual challenges faced by executioners who were simultaneously excluded from normal Christian life, yet expected to participate in the administration of divine justice. Despite their social exclusion from regular church services, most executioners appear to have been devoutly religious individuals who struggled to reconcile their professional duties with Christian teachings about mercy, forgiveness, and the sanctity of human life. The secret vocabulary contains terms for different types of prayers said during executions, techniques for providing spiritual counsel to condemned prisoners in their final moments, and methods for managing their own spiritual contamination from repeated contact with violent death. These practices suggest that executioners developed their own theological frameworks for understanding their work, creating informal religious traditions that operated outside official church doctrine. Medical knowledge encoded in the executioner's language demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and physiology that rivaled formal medical training available to university-educated physicians. They needed to know how to cause specific types of pain without permanent damage during torture sessions, how to revive unconscious prisoners during interrogations, and how to ensure that executions achieve their intended effects without unnecessary prolonged suffering. This medical expertise made executioners valuable informal consultants for physicians studying anatomy, despite official prohibitions on such collaboration. The executioner's practical knowledge of human physiology, gained through direct observation and experience, complemented the theoretical understanding that physicians derived from classical texts, creating informal networks of medical knowledge exchange that operated in the shadows of official medical education. The psychological vocabulary within the cant reveals executioners' sophisticated understanding of crowd dynamics and public spectacle that would have impressed modern specialists in mass psychology. Public executions served multiple social functions beyond simple punishment. They provided entertainment for populations with few other diversions, reinforced social hierarchies by demonstrating the consequences of challenging authority, and created shared community experiences that strengthened social bonds. Executioners needed to understand how to manage these events to achieve their intended psychological effects while preventing riots, excessive sympathy for prisoners that might undermine the justice system's authority, or other disruptions to public order that could transform legal proceedings into social chaos. The secret language contained terms for reading crowd moods, techniques for timing dramatic moments to maximize impact, and strategies for managing the complex emotional dynamics that surrounded public death. Archaeological evidence supports these linguistic discoveries, revealing the material culture associated with professional execution that confirms the technical sophistication suggested by the secret vocabulary. Specialized tools found in executioner house excavations match terminology in the discovered language fragments, demonstrating that the linguistic evidence reflects actual practices rather than theoretical knowledge. These artifacts include not just the obvious implements of death, axes, ropes, and iron devices whose purposes remain grimly clear, but also sophisticated measuring instruments for ensuring precise blade angles, anatomical references carved in bone or wood for training purposes, and what appear to be instruction manuals for apprentice executioners, complete with diagrams showing optimal techniques for different types of execution. The decline of the executioner's cant appears to have coincided with broader changes in legal systems during the early modern period, as centralized states took greater control over criminal justice and began replacing traditional executioner families with military personnel or civil servants. These new practitioners lacked the specialized knowledge and social isolation that had fostered the development of professional argot, leading to the gradual disappearance of the secret language as the social conditions that created it evolved. Professional executioners were increasingly replaced by soldiers who saw execution duty as a temporary assignment rather than a lifelong calling, or by bureaucrats who administered justice according to written procedures rather than inherited craft knowledge. The loss of hereditary executioner dynasties meant the loss of the social networks that had maintained and transmitted the secret vocabulary across generations. Modern attempts to reconstruct the complete executioners cant face significant challenges that reflect medieval society's ambivalent relationship with this necessary but disturbing profession. Many documents were deliberately destroyed by executioner families seeking to distance themselves from their ancestors' profession as social attitudes changed and new opportunities for social mobility became available. Church authorities systematically eliminated materials they considered spiritually contaminating, while political authorities destroyed records that might reveal uncomfortable details about medieval justice systems or create embarrassing comparisons with contemporary legal practices. The deliberate erasure of executioner culture reflects broader historical patterns of marginalized groups whose knowledge systems disappear when social structures change rapidly. However, fragments continue to emerge from unexpected sources: manuscript collections in remote monasteries, archaeological sites associated with medieval legal proceedings, and family archives maintained by descendants of executioner dynasties who preserved ancestral materials without fully understanding their significance. Each discovery adds pieces to a linguistic puzzle that reveals more about the sophisticated professional culture that developed among medieval Europe's most necessary yet despised craftsmen. The secret language of executioners provides a unique window into medieval attitudes toward death, justice, professional knowledge, and social marginalization that complements and sometimes contradicts official historical sources. While chronicles and legal documents present execution as straightforward administrative procedures, the executioners can't reveal the complex human realities behind these stark official accounts. The study of this lost vocabulary also raises broader questions about historical linguistics and the preservation of specialized knowledge that extend far beyond medieval history. How many other professional languages disappeared without trace as social conditions changed? What techniques and traditions were lost when craftsmen could no longer pass their knowledge to apprentices? How much cultural knowledge disappears during periods of rapid social transformation? The executioners can't represent not just a curiosity of medieval legal history, but a reminder of how much cultural knowledge vanishes when social structures transform rapidly and marginalized groups lose the networks that preserve their traditions. It demonstrates that even the most despised professions developed sophisticated knowledge systems that deserve scholarly attention and historical preservation. Current research focuses on computer-assisted analysis of the surviving vocabulary fragments, comparing linguistic patterns with other known argots and professional languages to identify common features and evolutionary relationships. Digital reconstruction techniques may eventually allow scholars to piece together enough of the executioner's cant to understand its grammar and syntax, providing even deeper insights into the professional culture of medieval justice. These investigations continue to reveal the unexpected sophistication of medieval European society, showing that specialized knowledge systems developed wherever professional needs demanded them, regardless of social status or moral approval. The secret language of executioners stands as testament to human ingenuity in creating order and meaning even in the darkest corners of social existence, where death was both craft and calling, and silence preserved the knowledge that society needed but preferred not to acknowledge. Yet while some members of medieval society developed secret languages to navigate the margins of acceptable life, others lived in such spectacular luxury that their daily routines became elaborate performances of power and piety. From the hidden cant of executioners, we turn now to the most visible and magnificent displays of medieval wealth, the daily rituals that transformed religious authority into earthly splendor within the marble halls of ecclesiastical palaces. Cardinal Alessandro Farnese wakes each morning in his Roman palace to the sound of silver bells, their pure tones carefully tuned to create harmonious chords that announce the beginning of another day in one of medieval Europe's most rarefied worlds. The bells are rung by servants who have been preparing for his rising since before dawn, men whose entire existence revolves around the elaborate choreography required to transform a sleeping prelate into a walking symbol of divine authority on earth. The year is 1492, and Cardinal Farnese represents the pinnacle of medieval ecclesiastical power, a man whose daily routine demonstrates how the medieval church's highest officials lived in splendor that rivaled kings while maintaining, at least in theory, the Christian ideals of poverty and humility. His life unfolds as a carefully orchestrated performance of piety and power, where every gesture carries symbolic weight and every luxury serves to reinforce the divine nature of earthly hierarchy. The cardinal's bedchamber occupies an entire floor of his palace, a space larger than most village churches and infinitely more comfortable than the crude shelters where ordinary Christians spend their nights. The walls are covered with Flemish tapestries depicting scenes from the lives of saints, each panel woven with threads of gold and silk that catch the morning light and transform biblical narratives into shimmering displays of artistic virtuosity and conspicuous wealth. His bed represents a masterwork of medieval craftsmanship, large enough to accommodate 6 ordinary men, yet designed for the solitary slumber of one of Christendom's most powerful figures. The mattress is stuffed with swan down collected from the papal estates, creating a sleeping surface of impossible softness, while sheets of linen so fine they seem almost transparent provide covering that costs more than most artisans earn in a lifetime of labor. Above this terrestrial cloud hangs a canopy of crimson velvet embroidered with the cardinal's family coat of arms and the papal keys, creating a textile cathedral that transforms sleep itself into a sacred act. The symbolism is deliberate and complex. Even in unconsciousness, the cardinal remains connected to both earthly and divine authority, his rest occurring within a space that proclaims his status to anyone privileged enough to witness his private moments. The morning ablutions that follow his awakening require a staff of 12 specialized servants, each responsible for a different aspect of transforming the cardinal from private individual to public symbol. This is no simple matter of washing and dressing, but an elaborate ritual that combines practical necessity with symbolic transformation, turning a mortal man into a living representation of church authority. The body servants, young men chosen for their beauty as much as their discretion, assist with washing using water that has been perfumed with oils imported from Constantinople and heated to precise temperatures in silver braziers that were blessed by previous popes. The cardinal's skin is anointed with lotions containing ground pearls and gold leaf, substances believed to purify the flesh and prepare it for communion with the divine, while creating a subtle luminescence that makes him appear almost supernatural in candlelight. These preparations reflect medieval beliefs about the physical manifestation of spiritual authority. The cardinal's body must be transformed into a worthy vessel for divine power, cleansed and purified through rituals that emphasize his separation from ordinary humanity. The exotic oils and precious substances used in his care come from across the known world, demonstrating the global reach of church authority while creating sensory experiences unavailable to lesser mortals. The ritual of dressing transforms the cardinal from private individual to public symbol through a process that requires 30 minutes of careful work by servants trained in the precise ceremonial requirements that govern ecclesiastical costume. His undergarments are silk blessed by the Pope himself, creating an invisible foundation of sanctified luxury that touches his skin throughout the day. His scarlet robes require meticulous attention to detail, with each fold and drape positioned according to ceremonial regulations that date back centuries and carry specific symbolic meanings. The fabric alone represents wealth that could feed a village for years, silk dyed with cochineal from Spain, trimmed with ermine from Russia, and decorated with gold thread spun by artisans whose techniques are closely guarded family secrets passed down through generations of specialized craftsmen. The color scarlet itself carries profound significance in medieval religious symbolism, representing both the blood of martyrs and the fire of divine love, while the precious materials used in its creation demonstrate the Church's ability to command the world's finest resources in service of spiritual authority. When the cardinal appears in public wearing these robes, he becomes a walking display of the Church's wealth, power, and global connections. Breakfast in the cardinal's palace bears no resemblance to the simple meals that sustain ordinary Christians through their daily labors. The morning meal unfolds as an elaborate artistic presentation that combines sustenance with symbolism, creating edible artworks that nourish both body and soul, while demonstrating the cardinal's sophisticated cultural refinement. The first course consists of fresh fruits arranged in patterns that recreate biblical scenes with remarkable artistry and attention to detail. Grapes from the cardinal's own vineyards are formed into the shape of Christ's crown of thorns, their deep purple color suggesting drops of sacred blood, while apples are arranged to suggest the Garden of Eden, complete with serpentine patterns created from twisted citrus peels. Pomegranates are split to reveal seeds like drops of martyr's blood, their crimson interior creating dramatic visual contrasts with the white porcelain plates on which they're served. These symbolic presentations require teams of servants working through the night to achieve the proper artistic effects, transforming simple nutrition into complex theological statements that reinforce the cardinal's scholarly understanding of Christian symbolism. The main breakfast courses demonstrate the cardinal's international connections and sophisticated palate, while showcasing the global reach of church influence. Fresh fish arrive daily from the Mediterranean, transported in specially designed tanks of seawater by relay teams of horsemen who ride through the night to ensure that the cardinal's table always features the finest possible ingredients. Exotic spices from trade routes controlled by Venetian merchants flavor dishes prepared by cooks trained in techniques borrowed from Muslim Andalusia and Byzantine Constantinople, creating fusion cuisines that would be impossible anywhere else in medieval Europe. The cardinal's breakfast table features flavors literally unknown to most Europeans. Combinations of sweet and savory, delicate herbs, and bold spices that create sensory experiences as sophisticated as anything available in the modern world. These ingredients cost more per ounce than a skilled craftsman's annual wage, yet they're used with casual abundance that demonstrates the cardinal's position above mundane economic concerns. Each meal becomes a statement about the church's ability to command the world's finest resources, while the cardinal's sophisticated palate serves as evidence of his cultural refinement and worldly experience. Between courses, the cardinal receives reports from agents stationed throughout Europe and beyond, men who gather intelligence about political developments, religious controversies, and economic opportunities that might affect church interests. These briefings are delivered by individuals who speak in carefully coded language, their reports concealed within discussions of theological questions or administrative minutiae that would bore any casual eavesdropper who might accidentally overhear sensitive information. The cardinal's intelligence network rivals those maintained by secular princes, gathering information through a combination of formal diplomatic channels and informal networks of clergy, merchants, and scholars who serve as the church's eyes and ears throughout the Christian world and beyond. This morning intelligence gathering allows the cardinal to remain informed about developments that might affect his various political, economic, and religious interests while maintaining the appearance of focusing solely on spiritual matters. The cardinal's library occupies 3 floors of his palace and represents one of Europe's most valuable collections of manuscripts and early printed books, a treasure house of human knowledge that demonstrates both his scholarly credentials and the church's role as guardian of learning throughout the medieval period. Each morning after breakfast, he spends 2 hours reading correspondence from scholars, theologians, and politicians seeking his patronage or support for various intellectual and artistic projects. His responses, dictated to teams of secretaries who work in shifts to handle the volume of communication, influence university curricula across Europe, shape theological debates that affect millions of believers, and determine which artistic projects receive church funding that can make the difference between obscurity and immortality for aspiring creators. The library's treasures include Greek manuscripts saved from Constantinople's fall to the Turks, precious texts that preserve classical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever, Arabic treatises on mathematics and medicine, translated by Jewish scholars working under church patronage, demonstrate the complex intellectual exchanges that characterize medieval learning despite religious and political conflicts. Illuminated psalters created by monks whose artistic techniques represent centuries of accumulated knowledge line the shelves alongside philosophical works that trace the development of Christian thought from the early church fathers through contemporary theological innovations. The cardinal reads comfortably in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic, linguistic abilities that mark him as one of medieval Europe's most educated individuals and provide access to intellectual traditions that remain closed to most of his contemporaries. His correspondence reveals the global scope of his interests and influence, demonstrating how church authority extends far beyond European borders. Letters arrive from missionary bishops in recently converted territories, seeking guidance on adapting Christian practices to local customs while maintaining doctrinal purity. Merchants request his intervention in trade disputes that span continents, understanding that church influence often carries more weight than secular authority in international commerce. Kings and princes court his support for dynastic claims that could reshape the political map of Europe, recognizing that papal approval can legitimize questionable successions or territorial acquisitions. Each response requires careful consideration of complex theological, political, and economic factors, as the cardinal must balance various competing interests while maintaining the appearance of impartial spiritual authority guided solely by divine will. The cardinal's midday activities demonstrate the performative aspects of his position, as he presides over public audiences in his palace's great hall that showcase his power while providing opportunities for petitioners to request favors, settle disputes, or seek ecclesiastical appointments that could transform their lives and fortunes. These sessions are carefully choreographed theater, with the cardinal seated on a throne-like chair that elevates him above suppliants who must kneel and kiss his ring before speaking. The physical arrangement reinforces hierarchical relationships, while the ritualistic elements create an atmosphere of sacred authority that makes even mundane administrative decisions seem like divine pronouncements. The range of petitioners illustrates the cardinal's diverse responsibilities and the extent to which church authority penetrates every aspect of medieval life. Abbesses seek his protection from nobles attempting to seize convent lands through legal technicalities or outright force, understanding that only ecclesiastical authority can effectively counter secular power in such disputes. Merchants request letters of introduction to church authorities in distant cities, documents that can open doors and establish credit relationships across the complex network of religious institutions that spans medieval Europe. Scholars petition for access to restricted manuscripts that could advance their research but remain locked in church libraries, available only to those with proper ecclesiastical credentials. Nobles seek annulments of inconvenient marriages, understanding that only church authority can dissolve unions that have become politically or economically disadvantageous. Each case requires the cardinal to balance competing interests while maintaining the appearance of impartial spiritual authority, making decisions that affect individual lives while considering broader implications for church policy and social stability. The cardinal's dining arrangements for the main meal of the day transform eating into elaborate ritual that demonstrates both his personal refinement and the church's cultural sophistication. His dining hall can accommodate 200 guests, its walls decorated with frescoes depicting biblical feasts, and its ceiling painted to resemble the heavens, creating an environment where earthly consumption takes place within a context of divine symbolism. The cardinal sits at an elevated table that positions him symbolically between earth and sky, served on plates of gold and silver by noblemen's sons, whose service represents both personal honor and political alliance between their families and church authority. This arrangement creates visible hierarchies while providing opportunities for informal political networking that can influence both secular and religious policy. The meal itself unfolds across dozens of courses, each representing different theological or symbolic themes that transform consumption into spiritual education. Fish prepared in the shape of Christian symbols remind diners of Christ's ministry, while game birds arranged to suggest angels' wings connect earthly sustenance to heavenly grace through visual metaphors that reinforce religious teachings. Elaborate sugar sculptures recreate biblical scenes with remarkable artistic sophistication, creating edible artworks that demonstrate both wealth and piety through their temporary beauty. These creations require master craftsmen working for days to achieve the desired effects, yet they're consumed in minutes, emphasizing the transitory nature of earthly pleasures while showcasing the resources available to church authority. Musical entertainment during meals features composers and performers drawn from across Europe, creating performances that blend spiritual devotion with aesthetic pleasure. The cardinal maintains a chapel choir whose members are selected as much for their musical ability as their appearance, ensuring that every aspect of his household reflects the highest standards of beauty and artistic achievement. Secular music between courses provides relief from religious intensity while demonstrating the cardinal's sophisticated cultural tastes and his understanding that effective authority requires the ability to appeal to various aspects of human nature. The careful balance between sacred and secular elements creates an atmosphere of refined luxury that reinforces the cardinal's position as both spiritual leader and cultural patron. Afternoon activities vary according to the liturgical calendar and political necessities, as the cardinal must balance his roles as religious leader, political figure, and cultural patron while maintaining the appearance of focusing primarily on spiritual concerns. On major feast days, he participates in elaborate church services that can last for hours, his presence transforming routine worship into spectacular displays of ecclesiastical authority. His vestments for these occasions include embroidered scenes from saints' lives, precious gems arranged in patterns that catch and reflect candlelight, and accessories crafted by the most skilled artisans in Europe. Each element carries specific symbolic meanings while contributing to overall effects that make the cardinal appear almost supernatural when he moves through clouds of incense in the flickering light of hundreds of candles. Administrative duties occupy much of the cardinal's afternoon schedule, as he oversees vast territorial holdings that generate income through agricultural production, mineral extraction, and commercial activities spanning multiple countries. His stewards present detailed reports on crop yields, tenant payments, and investment opportunities that require his approval, demonstrating that church wealth depends on sophisticated financial management rather than simple charitable donations. These business activities generate revenue that funds both his luxurious lifestyle and the church's broader charitable and educational missions, creating a complex economy that supports everything from monastery schools to hospital construction. The cardinal's financial decisions affect thousands of lives, while his investment strategies influence economic development across his territories. The cardinal's involvement in banking and finance reveals the complex economic relationships that support medieval religious life, as he provides loans to princes planning military campaigns, invests in trading ventures that span continents, and manages financial instruments that facilitate commerce across political and religious boundaries. These activities require sophisticated understanding of international markets and monetary systems that rivals the expertise of professional merchants and bankers. Evening entertainments in the cardinal's palace blend cultural refinement with political networking, as dinner guests include artists seeking patronage, diplomats negotiating international agreements, and scholars debating theological questions that could influence church policy for generations. Conversations range across topics that span human knowledge, conducted in multiple languages among individuals who represent European civilization's intellectual and political elite. These gatherings serve multiple purposes simultaneously. They provide the cardinal with information about developments throughout Europe, create opportunities for informal diplomacy that can resolve conflicts before they require formal intervention, and demonstrate his cultural sophistication to visitors who will spread his reputation throughout their own networks of influence. The cardinal's private apartments provide sanctuary from public performance, yet even his most intimate spaces reflect his status and wealth through artistic treasures that would be considered priceless in any context. His private chapel contains relics of saints whose authenticity is certified by papal decree, creating a personal sanctuary that connects him directly to divine power through physical objects that bridge the gap between earthly and heavenly authority. His study features furniture inlaid with precious materials and decorated with scenes from classical mythology, demonstrating how medieval religious leaders incorporated pagan artistic traditions into Christian contexts through sophisticated cultural synthesis that enriched both traditions. The books, artwork, and devotional objects that surround him create an environment of scholarly luxury that reinforces his identity as both spiritual authority and intellectual leader. Personal relationships within the cardinal's household reveal the human dimensions of ecclesiastical power. As servants who have worked for him for decades achieve quasi-familial status, their loyalty rewarded with privileges and protections that extend to their own families. Younger clergy attached to his household receive education and advancement opportunities that shape their entire careers, creating networks of obligation that extend the cardinal's influence across generations. These relationships demonstrate how medieval authority operated through personal bonds rather than impersonal institutions, as the cardinal's favor could transform lives while his displeasure could destroy careers. The household becomes a training ground for future church leaders while serving as a model of how spiritual authority should manifest in material form. The cardinal's bedtime routine reverses the morning's elaborate preparations, with servants carefully preserving each article of clothing and accessory for future use, while ensuring that his transition from public symbol to private individual occurs with appropriate ceremony. Even his nightclothes are works of art, embroidered with protective symbols and blessed by religious authorities who understand that spiritual power requires constant maintenance and renewal. His final prayers, offered in a private oratory decorated with some of Europe's most valuable religious artifacts, conclude a day that has demonstrated both the privileges and responsibilities of medieval ecclesiastical power. These moments of private devotion reveal the genuine spirituality that coexists with material luxury, as the cardinal seeks divine guidance for decisions that affect millions of lives while acknowledging his dependence on grace that transcends earthly authority. This daily cycle repeats with variations throughout the year, shaped by religious festivals that require special observances, political crises that demand immediate attention, and personal obligations that reflect the cardinal's position at the intersection of spiritual and temporal power. His life represents the apex of medieval religious hierarchy, demonstrating how the Church's most powerful officials balance spiritual duties with worldly concerns, personal luxury with public service, and individual desires with institutional obligations. The Cardinal's Palace serves as a microcosm of medieval European civilization, where sacred and secular, ancient and contemporary, local and international influences merged to create a unique cultural synthesis that would shape European development for centuries to come. Within these marble halls, the contradictions and complexities of medieval Christianity found their most elaborate expression, creating a world where spiritual authority manifested through material splendor and divine power operated through very human institutions. As we reach the end of our journey through the hidden corners of medieval Europe, we find ourselves contemplating the extraordinary contrasts that defined this complex civilization. From the desperate struggles of village watchmen who faced impossible choices with crude staffs and failing courage, to the sophisticated intelligence networks of emperors who transformed disability into advantage, from the secret vocabularies of society's most despised professionals to the elaborate rituals of its most exalted religious authorities. Medieval Europe emerges as a world of startling contradictions and unexpected sophistication. The medieval period reveals itself not as a simple age of ignorance and brutality, but as a time when human ingenuity found ways to create order from chaos, meaning from suffering, and beauty from the most unlikely circumstances. Whether through the silent communication of deaf spies, the professional pride of executioners, or the spectacular performances of ecclesiastical power, medieval people developed systems of knowledge and authority that were far more complex than popular stereotypes suggest. Perhaps most remarkably, we see how those whom society dismissed or marginalized often possessed the most valuable insights and capabilities. The deaf men who became Frederick's most effective agents, the executioners who developed sophisticated professional vocabularies, the village watchmen who maintained fragile order through personal sacrifice, all demonstrate how medieval Europe's hidden heroes operated in the spaces between official recognition and absolute necessity. Tonight, as you rest in the comfort and safety of the modern world, you might reflect on how far we've traveled from those uncertain times when survival required constant vigilance, and when the difference between order and chaos often hung on the courage of individuals who received little recognition for their essential work. The warm shelter that surrounds you, the absence of armed brigands beyond your gates, the security that allows you to sleep without fear of invasion or theft. These represent achievements built on centuries of human effort to create the stable, peaceful world we often take for granted. Let these stories of medieval struggle and triumph carry you gently into rest, knowing that the courage and ingenuity of countless forgotten individuals across the centuries have contributed to the peace and security that now allows you to close your eyes without fear. In the silence of the night, remember that sometimes the most profound power comes from those who watch and listen from the shadows, keeping guard over the delicate balance between civilization and the wilderness that forever lies just beyond our sight. Sleep well, knowing that others once stood watch so that we might rest in safety.